disagreement in the church about how to follow Jesus. Now, we don't have any disagreements in our church, do we? There's no Christians today, especially not this week, where there's going to be any disagreements about anything in our country. They had a little disagreement in Galatia, and they couldn't vote for their government like we could, but they could vote on how they would live their life. They could choose how they would follow Jesus, the decisions and the practices they would do. And one disagreement took center stage. How Jewish did Christians need to be? How Jewish did Christians need to be? Now, they didn't word it exactly that way, but the disagreement revolved around how strict or how closely followers of Jesus needed to follow certain laws in the Old Testament and certain customs that were common for the Jewish in the first century. Things like circumcising their males and eating kosher and observing the Sabbath. Most of the new believers in Galatia were Greek in heritage, meaning they didn't grow up going to temple, and they hadn't been doing these customs for the majority of their life. And now that they're following Jesus, now that they believe Jesus raised from the grave, they're worshiping with other Christians, and some of the Christians are saying, you've got to start doing these other things. And so Paul writes a letter to the church from a place of deep frustration and passion, and you can see why Paul is so angry. Because there were believers in this church saying, you can't do this and still be a Christian. You can't work on a Sunday if you're a Christian. You can't eat these foods if you're a Christian. And what happened was people were adding to the gospel. They were adding requirements. In order to be a Christian, you have to do these things, and you can't do these things over here. I get mad when I see this today, when I see people adding to the requirements of what it means to be a Christian, because the basic requirement is simple. There's a one-verse summary in Romans chapter 10. Paul puts it this way. He says, if you declare with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Believe that God raised Jesus from the grave. You say, I'm going to follow Jesus as my Lord. That is the simplest definition of what it means to be a Christian. The problem then and the problem now comes when we add to Scripture.